The message arrived at 2:17 a.m., and Eleanor knew something permanent had broken before she even unlocked the phone. It wasn't the vibration that pulled her from sleep or the dim light reflecting against the ceiling, but a quiet internal shift, a warning sharpened by years of paying attention to what went unsaid. She reached for the phone carefully so she wouldn't wake Daniel sleeping beside her and read a message that was never meant for her eyes, brief yet intimate, written with confidence, ending with a promise that had never belonged to her life. Eleanor didn't cry or gasp. She lay perfectly still, staring into the darkness while Daniel's calm breathing filled the room, and in that stillness she understood that the marriage she believed she was living inside had quietly ended without argument or announcement. Eleanor Hayes was 34, respected for her discipline and foresight, a project manager who built her days around structure, timelines, and preparation, while Daniel, 36, worked in real estate, charming and persuasive, a man who understood how to shape conversations and outcomes in his favor. Together for 10 years and married for 7, they were described by friends as stable, dependable, and unremarkable in the comforting way long-term couples often were. Morning arrived without drama, Daniel kissing her cheek, pouring coffee, complaining about traffic, and Eleanor felt something colder than anger settle inside her as she watched him lie effortlessly, realizing that deception frightened her more than betrayal itself. She said nothing, knowing silence often forced truth to surface more effectively than confrontation ever could. Over the following weeks, Eleanor observed patterns Daniel assumed were invisible, meetings that stretched later than usual, phone calls taken away from rooms, his phone always turned face down, a sudden attention to clothes and appearance he had never cared about before. Eleanor continued her routines, went to work, prepared meals, smiled at appropriate moments, all while quietly collecting details that no longer fit the life she believed she was living. Eventually, the name attached to the messages emerged: Mara Collins, 28, recently transferred to Daniel's firm, divorced, ambitious, described in his texts as uncomplicated and easy. Eleanor studied Mara's public presence with outrage, realizing what unsettled her most was not cruelty but sincerity, because Daniel hadn't just cheated. He had rewritten reality, casting Eleanor as distant and himself as misunderstood. Pain shifted inside her, sharpening into resolve. Eleanor didn't follow Daniel or demand explanations. Instead, she reorganized her life silently, accepted additional responsibilities at work, reconnected with people she had slowly drifted from, while Daniel mistook her calm detachment for forgiveness. His confidence grew careless, his caution fading as he believed the danger had passed. He spoke more freely, complained about work more openly, and let small inconsistencies slip, unaware that Eleanor noticed everything. She began to understand how long the affair had lasted, not through dates or proof, but through Daniel's ease, the comfort of someone who no longer feared discovery. When he casually mentioned an upcoming networking event hosted by his firm, spouses encouraged to attend, Eleanor agreed immediately, her tone neutral, already understanding that some truths surface best in public spaces where lies struggled to survive. On the night of the event, she chose simplicity, a black dress without spectacle, not to attract attention, but to remove distraction, and inside the crowded venue she identified Mara instantly, standing just close enough to Daniel to signal familiarity without claiming ownership. Daniel stiffened when he saw Eleanor approach, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second too long to hide. Eleanor introduced herself politely, her voice calm, watching confusion ripple across Mara's face as recognition followed. They stepped aside, and Eleanor spoke only facts: her marriage, their shared home, the years they had built together, the ring Daniel still wore on his finger. Mara listened, visibly shaken, admitting Daniel had said it was over, that he was leaving, that Eleanor was distant and already gone, and Eleanor believed her, understanding that betrayal often required two people believing the same lie for different reasons. She wasn't there to punish another woman. She was there to dismantle a story that should never have existed. Mara left the event early, her confidence replaced by shock, and Eleanor returned to the crowd composed and calm, aware that the most important moment of the night had already passed. At home later, Daniel tried to speak casually, but his words fractured under pressure, and when he finally confessed, it came in fragments filled with excuses, apologies layered with self-pity, explanations that framed betrayal as confusion rather than choice. Eleanor listened without interruption, already standing far outside the narrative he was desperately trying to preserve, understanding that what came next would not require anger or revenge, only patience, precision, and the willingness to let consequences unfold naturally. Daniel waited for Eleanor's response as if volume alone might save him, expecting anger or tears to give him something solid to argue against. But what unsettled him most was her stillness, the way she listened without interrupting as he spoke in careful circles, apologizing while justifying himself, reframing deliberate choices as moments of confusion and loneliness. And when he finally ran out of explanations, breathless and hopeful, Eleanor told him calmly that she forgave him, watching relief flood his face before she continued with the clarity he had not prepared for, explaining that forgiveness did not mean staying and did not erase consequences, only freed her from carrying resentment forward. Within 2 weeks, she moved out, choosing a smaller apartment that felt honest rather than shared space poisoned by lies, and the divorce unfolded efficiently because Eleanor had prepared long before Daniel understood how final her decision was, consulting a lawyer quietly, organizing finances with precision, and asking only for what was fair, nothing dramatic, nothing fueled by revenge. Daniel signed the papers quickly, mistaking cooperation for redemption and believing the worst was behind him. But what followed was quieter and far more permanent. Eleanor rebuilt her life deliberately, reshaping routines, focusing on work and creating distance without bitterness, never contacting Mara again because she understood Mara had been fed the same carefully edited version of reality Daniel once gave her, and she refused to compete for a story that was already collapsing under its own weight. In Daniel's world, things began to shift subtly, almost invisibly at first, as trust, the currency of his profession, started to erode. Clients noticed missed deadlines that once would have been excused, partners sensed inconsistencies and explanations that no longer aligned, and opportunities he assumed were guaranteed quietly disappeared without confrontation. Eleanor never spread rumors or accused anyone, speaking only when asked and only in plain truths that led nowhere back to her, allowing patterns to reveal themselves naturally. Daniel blamed stress, timing, bad luck, anything except himself, until charm became defensiveness and confidence thinned into anxious reassurance that convinced no one. The relationship he tried to maintain with Mara fractured under the weight of reality once secrecy disappeared, replaced by suspicion and unmet expectations, and eventually she resigned from the firm. Whatever confrontation followed no longer Eleanor's concern because she had removed herself entirely from the narrative Daniel told about his life. Months later, Daniel sent Eleanor a message admitting he missed her and had ruined everything, and Eleanor read the words once before deleting them, understanding that silence was not cruelty but clarity, a boundary that required no explanation. Time passed with steady indifference, and a year later Eleanor stood in another networking venue, this time invited as a guest speaker, addressing a room filled with professionals about leadership, transparency, and the hidden cost of small dishonesties. Her voice calm and assured, never mentioning her past because she didn't need to. Daniel was not there, and she felt no absence. When someone asked how she remained composed under pressure, Eleanor answered simply that preparation mattered, and so did knowing when to walk away, because resilience was built long before it was tested. Later, standing alone by a window overlooking the city, Eleanor felt no triumph and no desire for revenge, realizing it had never been her goal. Balance had been. Daniel had destabilized their marriage with lies, and she had stepped aside and allowed consequences to align naturally, understanding that the most effective form of retribution was refusing to protect someone from the results of their own choices. Love, she understood now, was not fragile but precise, requiring honesty to survive and collapsing quietly without it, not in chaos but in silence. Eleanor left the event without looking back, the city moving steadily around her, and the message that once shattered her marriage no longer haunted her. Existing only as a marker of the moment, her life redirected towards something cleaner, truer, and finally, her own, a quiet ending that needed no witness to be complete.
What would you do if you were in this situation? Let's talk in the comments.